It began as the ultimate modern-day fairy tale. The kind of love story that headlines were made for, documentaries immortalized, and audiences across the world ate up with starry-eyed enthusiasm. Prince Harry, the charming, rebellious younger son of Princess Diana and King Charles, had found the one. And not just any one, but Meghan Markle, a biracial American actress with a humanitarian streak and a dazzling smile that could melt even the stiffest upper lip in Buckingham Palace. The romance seemed so perfect it practically wrote itself. But looking back now, through the lens of betrayal, heartbreak, and whispers of manipulation, many are beginning to wonder if this perfect love story was anything but spontaneous. Was it real? Or was it an expertly executed plan? A calculated climb to power that started long before the cameras began rolling? To understand how it all possibly began unraveling, we must first step back into the beginning. Before the royal wedding, before the Netflix deals, and long before the scandalous discovery of an alleged affair between Meghan and Markus Anderson. At the heart of this explosive chapter lies one uncomfortable but unavoidable question. Was Meghan Markle's love story with Prince Harry genuine, or was it part of something bigger, something crafted? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The couple reportedly met in July 2016 on a blind date arranged by a mutual friend. But many insiders have since suggested that the date wasn't as random as it appeared. Rumors swirled in London's elite social circles that Meghan had long admired the prince. Some say she told friends she would love to date Harry years before they met. Others recall how she curated her Instagram with quotes about destiny and royalty, long before the world knew her name alongside his. Still, in the beginning, their chemistry was undeniable. The world watched as Harry's traditional boundaries seemed to melt away around Meghan. He held her hand in public, broke protocol to show her affection, and seemed intoxicated by her presence. To many, this was true love. To others, especially those close to the royal household, it was a warning sign. A whirlwind romance, public declarations, and sudden shifts in behavior were not typically the royal way. But Harry, who had long lived in his brother's shadow, finally looked like he had carved a future uniquely his own. What the public didn't know, however, was that someone else had always been in the picture, Markus Anderson. Described in headlines as Meghan's mystery man or best friend, Anderson wasn't just another socialite. He was a powerful connector in the upper echelons of society, working for Soho House, the ultra-exclusive members club that catered to the who's who of fashion, politics, and entertainment. And according to multiple sources, he wasn't just Meghan's friend. He was her closest advisor, her confidant, and possibly even her partner in more than one sense of the word. Markus was there from the beginning, some say even before Meghan met Harry. He was instrumental in shaping Meghan's image, introducing her to key players in media and charity, and guiding her through the subtle game of public perception. He was seen at events with her, attended important dinners, and reportedly even traveled with her. To casual observers, it seemed like the bond of lifelong friendship. But behind palace walls, whispers were louder. Some aides and insiders who preferred to remain anonymous said they were confused by the frequency with which Markus popped up. He seemed to always be around, whether in Toronto or London. When Meghan moved to the UK, Markus was often in the background, and some noticed Harry's initial discomfort with how close they were. There were rumors, quickly brushed aside by the Sussex's press team, that Harry had once asked Meghan to cool down the relationship, at least publicly. But Meghan was firm. Markus had been with her before all of this, and she wasn't going to abandon her past. Still, it was hard to ignore how involved Markus was in nearly everything. From helping Meghan decide on fashion to orchestrating media relationships, some speculated that he was almost like a shadow advisor. And it's important to remember that Soho House, where Markus held influence, wasn't just a club. It was a hub for elite networking, a place where deals were made in hushed tones over espresso martinis. It was where Meghan allegedly positioned herself to meet influential people. People like Misha Nanu, who was close to both Meghan and Harry and reportedly had a hand in orchestrating their first meeting. The connections began to paint a more complex picture. Was Meghan introduced to Harry purely by chance, or was it part of a grander orchestration, a matchmaking guided by social influence and future potential? Of course, at the time, None of this was part of the public discourse. The headlines were glowing, the engagement photos magical, and the interviews painted a picture of two soulmates defying the odds. And to Harry, who had experienced loss, loneliness, and media trauma his whole life, Meghan's warmth may have felt like salvation. She listened, she understood, and more importantly, she chose him. But now, as the dust settles on years of drama, rebranding, and revelations, even Harry himself may be questioning the foundation of it all. Meghan's climb into royal life was swift. From a lifestyle blogger and actress in Toronto to the Duchess of Sussex and a global icon, it happened in record time. And while she won hearts around the world, not everyone within palace walls was convinced. Behind the glitz, rumors persisted. Some said Meghan was too controlling. Others claimed she kept a tight circle that included Markus at its core, and some even feared he held more sway over her than anyone realized. This is where the narrative begins to shift. Because if the relationship between Meghan and Markus was as close as it seemed, if they were, indeed, more than just friends, then that poses a troubling question. Was Harry unknowingly part of someone else's story? A story of ambition, power, and calculated choices disguised as love? Even before the wedding, some royals reportedly raised concerns. William, according to whispers, cautioned Harry to take his time. Charles was said to be wary of how quickly things were moving. But Harry, fueled by emotion and a deep-seated desire to protect Meghan, pushed forward. He cut off friends, distanced himself from his family, and began the process of redefining his identity, all in Meghan's name. Was this passion, or was it manipulation? As time went on, Harry seemed to adopt Meghan's worldview. The couple presented a united front against the media, the monarchy, and anyone who dared question them. But all the while, Markus remained in the shadows, present, silent, and unshakably loyal to Meghan. It's only now, as the story begins to unravel, that the pieces are being put together. Looking back, those early warning signs now seem glaring. The quick engagement, the isolation from family, the controlling of public narrative, all of it feels like part of a script written by someone who understood the game of fame far too well. And now, years later, the bombshell has allegedly dropped. That Meghan may have been having an affair with Markus. That Prince Harry discovered the truth. And that, after everything he gave up, his family, his titles, his legacy, he was left with betrayal. The love story that once captivated the world has now turned into a cautionary tale. And as we move forward into this exposé, we will explore how this royal relationship, once hailed as revolutionary, may have always been walking a tightrope over disaster. Before the world even knew the full scope of who Meghan Markle was, before her name was inscribed into history as a duchess and a global icon, there was already one man who knew her well, Markus Anderson. To the outside world, he seemed like just another member of her close-knit social circle. He was often referred to as her best friend, her confidant, her advisor, even her shadow. But as the clouds of scandal now begin to gather over what was once deemed a royal love story, the question many are asking is no longer about Meghan, but about the man beside her every step of the way. Who is Markus Anderson, really? Markus Anderson is not a household name to the average onlooker, yet within elite social and media circles, his name opens doors. He is known as one of the key figures at Soho House, an exclusive members-only club that spans the globe, catering to celebrities, billionaires, and those with enough influence to reshape industries behind velvet ropes and crafted cocktails. But unlike many in the spotlight, Markus has mastered the art of blending in while wielding power. He's the man behind introductions, the man who organizes the table placements at events, who decides who gets into the room and who's left outside. That kind of access, over time, becomes its own currency. And for Meghan Markle, it appears Markus was her key to that world. Their relationship goes back years, long before Meghan had ever met Prince Harry. While living in Toronto filming Suits, Meghan and Markus were inseparable. They were photographed at fashion events, private parties, intimate dinners. Not just as two people who happened to attend the same places, but as two who moved together, like a unit. She trusted him implicitly, and he seemed to be at the center of every milestone in her professional and personal life. It was Markus who reportedly helped shape her brand as a humanitarian. It was Markus who introduced her to the kind of powerful social networks that rarely welcome outsiders. And, if the whispers are to be believed, it was Markus who helped mastermind the careful transformation of Meghan Markle, actress, into Meghan Markle, global brand. For those unfamiliar with the Soho House scene, it's easy to overlook the magnitude of Markus's influence. But in elite social circles, Markus isn't just another socialite. He's a fixer, a connector, a gatekeeper. He's the type of person who can arrange a meeting between an ambitious actress and a billionaire media mogul without raising eyebrows. He can grant access to people who shape magazine covers, produce docuseries, and fund multi-million-dollar campaigns. To put it simply, if you want to climb the ranks in high society, having someone like Markus in your corner is a game changer. And Meghan had him front and center. What makes the relationship all the more curious is how seamlessly Markus appeared to navigate Meghan's transition from actress to royal. He was present at key moments, but never so visible as to draw unwanted attention. He appeared at the Invictus Games in Toronto in 2017, the first time Meghan and Harry went public with their relationship. Though many assumed he was just a supportive friend, some now question whether that visibility was intentional. Was Markus there as a quiet observer or as an active player in a narrative being carefully curated? Insiders now allege that it was Markus who helped guide Meghan on how to handle the spotlight, manage public perception, and navigate the ever-watchful eyes of the British press. And that leads us to the more controversial angle. The insinuation that Markus may have been more than just a friend. While there's no official confirmation of any romantic involvement, the whispers have never truly died down. Some claim their bond was too intense to be purely platonic. Others say their emotional chemistry was obvious, even in public. Reports have even surfaced of jealous moments, subtle tensions, and a pattern of Markle defending Markus above all else, sometimes even over Harry himself. Adding fuel to the speculation is how Harry allegedly reacted to Markus's presence over the years. Several reports from royal insiders describe how Prince Harry was initially confused, even irritated, by the constant involvement of this mysterious man from Meghan's past. He reportedly questioned why Markus was included in private plans, high-level meetings, and even family discussions. Meghan, however, remained steadfast. Markus was non-negotiable. And so, over time, Harry seemed to relent, at least on the surface. But cracks began to show. According to palace aides, Harry was never fully comfortable with Markus's influence. One unnamed source recalled a tense moment during a charity event planning meeting when Harry reportedly asked why Markus was even involved in logistical decisions. Meghan brushed it off, saying Markus was just helping with PR angles. But for Harry, the discomfort lingered. It wasn't just the presence of Markus that concerned some in the royal household. It was his level of control. Meghan's branding, from her clothes to her causes to her carefully curated public statements, always seemed to align with modern celebrity trends rather than traditional royal decorum. Many suspected Markus had a hand in this. After all, he was plugged into the entertainment elite, understood the algorithms of fame, and knew exactly how to manage headlines. And with the Sussexes making bold moves, like stepping down from royal duties, signing multi-million-dollar media deals, and launching social campaigns, it began to look less like rebellion and more like a calculated brand pivot. Then there's the issue of timing. Markus's visibility reportedly increased around key turning points in Meghan's life: her engagement, her wedding, the birth of Archie, and especially around the time of Megxit. At each of these moments, media analysts and royal commentators noticed a peculiar trend: a sudden surge in controlled, glossy PR content, polished interviews, and a stream of images that seemed to be managing a narrative, not responding to it. This level of strategic communication is not typical of overwhelmed royals. It's the hallmark of seasoned image professionals. And at the center of it all was Markus. So who is he? Some call him a mastermind. Others believe he's simply a friend who always had Meghan's best interests at heart. But in the wake of the alleged affair, the narrative has shifted. Questions are no longer about his professional prowess or friendship. They're about boundaries. They're about intentions. They're about whether Markus, despite his low profile, wielded more influence over Meghan, and by extension Harry, than anyone realized. This shift in perception is significant. Because if Marcus was indeed involved in an affair with Meghan while she was still married to Harry, that changes everything. Suddenly, he's not just a loyal friend. He's the man who may have orchestrated, or at the very least participated in, the undoing of a royal marriage. The implications of such a betrayal aren't merely personal. They are political, cultural, and global. Some sources say Harry always had a gut feeling that something was off. That despite Meghan's reassurances, he couldn't shake the sense that Marcus's loyalty wasn't entirely to him. The way Marcus spoke to Meghan, the inside jokes they shared, the subtle tension, it all added up to a suspicion Harry was too afraid to confront. Until, reportedly, he found evidence that forced him to face the truth. In royal circles, betrayal isn't just a family issue, it's a national one. The monarchy operates on trust, structure, and image. An affair, especially one involving someone as close as Marcus, poses a direct threat to all three. That's why this story isn't just about personal heartbreak. It's about a potential unraveling of carefully maintained royal relationships and reputations. As for Marcus, he has remained publicly silent through the whirlwind. No interviews, no statements, no public appearances that could be interpreted as defense or denial. And perhaps that's the most telling detail of all. In a world where silence can be strategic, Marcus's lack of response has only deepened the intrigue. Who is Marcus Anderson, really? Is he the loyal best friend Meghan always claimed he was? Or is he the architect behind the curtain, the man who not only helped build Meghan's public image but also, perhaps, became entangled in her personal life in ways that crossed the ultimate line? What comes next may provide those answers. But one thing is clear. The story of Meghan Markle cannot be told without understanding the role of Marcus Anderson. And if Prince Harry did discover a betrayal between his wife and the man she trusted more than anyone, then this isn't just the story of a failed marriage. It's the story of a royal deception years in the making. It started with glitz and glamour. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle first inked their highly publicized multi-million-dollar deal with Netflix, the world watched in awe. This was supposed to be the golden ticket. The couple, fresh off their shocking departure from royal duties, had finally secured their financial independence with what appeared to be a no-strings-attached jackpot. But behind the scenes, the glossy headlines masked deeper, unresolved tensions. The Netflix deal, hailed as a power move, would soon become a ticking time bomb, one that not only exposed the couple's weaknesses but also intensified the private turmoil in their marriage. And it would eventually become one of the critical catalysts that led to Prince Harry discovering the alleged affair between Meghan Markle and Marcus Anderson. From the very beginning, the Netflix partnership was never just a business deal. It was a lifeline. After stepping down from royal duties in 2020, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex found themselves without the financial cushion of the sovereign grant, royal protection, or the structured life they had always known. For the first time, they were fully on their own. Publicly, they framed this as freedom. Privately, it came with stress, anxiety, and the looming pressure to stay relevant and solvent. The Netflix deal offered them a buffer, but it came with an expectation, content that delivers. And that's where things started going sideways. Archwell Productions, the couple's production company, was touted as a force for uplifting, inspiring, and socially conscious storytelling. But months passed with little to show. Deadlines were missed. Proposals were rejected. Meghan's animated series, Pearl, which was in development, was canceled before it could ever see the light of day. Industry insiders began whispering that the couple didn't understand the content game the way they thought they did. Netflix executives, initially starstruck, were beginning to feel the sting of unmet expectations. And then came the elephant in the room, content quality. The couple's much-anticipated docuseries, Harry and Meghan, finally dropped. But instead of sparking a wave of admiration, it was met with criticism. Viewers accused it of being self-indulgent, one-sided, and lacking the emotional resonance Netflix had hoped for. Ratings were modest. Viewership dipped quickly after the first few days. And with that, the whispers became louder. The Sussexes were failing to deliver on their end of the bargain. Behind closed doors, this was a growing source of tension between Harry and Meghan. According to sources close to their inner circle, Harry became increasingly anxious about the couple's financial stability. He had always lived with the safety net of royal funding, first from the Duchy of Cornwall, then from his father. Now, With Archwell's operational costs mounting and staff salaries to be paid, the pressure was mounting. Meghan, however, reportedly responded differently. Instead of retreating in fear, she doubled down. She began taking more control over their projects, attending meetings solo, and seeking outside advisors, including, allegedly, Markus Anderson. And this is where things take a darker turn. Markus, with his deep connections in entertainment and media, was said to be instrumental in helping Meghan maneuver through Hollywood's gatekeepers. He introduced her to producers, arranged casual meetings with studio heads, and allegedly advised her on how to present ideas that would appeal to executive sensibilities. But what started as friendly professional help reportedly evolved into something more intense, more personal. While Harry was increasingly sidelined from some of these interactions, Markus's presence grew. Meghan, now under pressure to save face and deliver success, leaned on him more and more. And according to sources, this did not go unnoticed by Harry. He began to question why his wife, who once championed teamwork and transparency, was making decisions without him. He noticed Markus showing up at meetings unannounced, hanging around the house at odd hours, and engaging in what he felt were overly familiar exchanges with Meghan. Financial strain does things to people. It changes them. It forces them into corners they never thought they'd back into. And for Harry, a man already dealing with the emotional burden of severed family ties and public scrutiny, the Netflix failure felt like an unraveling. Meghan, by contrast, seemed to be thriving under the pressure, or at least masking it. She appeared at events, curated her image on social media, and maintained her polished public persona. But in the quiet hours, when the cameras were off and the meetings ended, the disconnect between the two reportedly widened. Adding to this tension were constant arguments over money management. Harry, raised in a world where wealth was inherited and tradition dictated spending, reportedly clashed with Meghan's approach, which leaned heavily on branding, investment, and lifestyle. The couple's Montecito mansion, their security costs, their staff, it was all adding up. And the Netflix money, once thought to last for years, was disappearing faster than anticipated. With their Netflix future hanging by a thread, Meghan allegedly began discussing alternative content ideas, some of which raised eyebrows. Whispers emerged that she wanted to pitch a docuseries on motherhood, royal exile, or even a dramatic retelling of her journey through the lens of betrayal and redemption. According to sources, Markus was a central figure in brainstorming these ideas. In one now widely speculated meeting, he was reportedly present as Meghan pitched a raw, vulnerable concept that seemed more autobiographical than objective. Harry reportedly objected to the direction. He felt it was veering too close to exploiting their personal struggles. But Meghan, allegedly emboldened by Markus's support and industry validation, insisted it was the kind of story that would resonate with audiences. The more the financial strain mounted, the more it appeared that Harry and Meghan were on separate paths. He sought privacy, healing, and distance from drama. She, some say, sought visibility, legacy, and continued relevance. The rift widened with every editorial disagreement, every failed pitch, every check that bounced or meeting that went south. The ultimate blow came when Netflix, after repeated delays and lukewarm performance, allegedly pulled back on additional commitments. The couple's 5-year deal, reportedly worth $100 million, now looked increasingly fragile. Meghan, who had built an entire post-royal identity around their Hollywood potential, was said to be devastated. But instead of stepping back to regroup as a couple, she leaned deeper into her inner circle, Markus included. For Harry, this was more than professional disappointment. It was personal. The life he had chosen, the wife he had defended, the country he had left behind, was beginning to feel like quicksand. And as his frustration with the business failures grew, so too did his suspicion about Meghan's bond with Markus. The two seemed too close, too coordinated, too aligned in ways that excluded him. The financial pressure from Netflix didn't just expose cracks in a business venture. It exposed cracks in a marriage. Long dinners between Meghan and Markus turned into overnight strategy sessions. Harry's name was absent in press releases, overshadowed in brand decisions, and quietly edited out of proposals. And then, reportedly, came the whispers. Harry was approached by someone from inside the Netflix circle who hinted at Meghan and Markus's unusual closeness. It wasn't said directly. It didn't need to be. But the suggestion was enough to send Harry spiraling into doubt and suspicion. He began to piece together patterns. The private meetings, the whispered conversations, the looks exchanged when they thought no one was watching. The alleged affair didn't start with a single explosive moment. It brewed in the slow, suffocating pressure cooker of professional failure and emotional distance. The Netflix collapse didn't just harm their brand. It broke their trust. And in that void of silence, tension, and unspoken words, a betrayal found room to grow. As the Netflix dream began to fade into a PR nightmare, Prince Harry was left grappling not only with the realization that his carefully crafted new life was falling apart, but also with a haunting, inescapable possibility that the person he gave up everything for may have been deceiving him from the very start. In Hollywood, whispers move faster than facts. In royal circles, silence is often louder than words. But when these two worlds collide, as they did in the case of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the murmurs become deafening. At first, the rumors were nothing more than a murky mist in the background, easy to dismiss, easier to ignore. But for Harry, they soon became impossible to overlook. What started as offhand comments and subtle social cues slowly evolved into a storm of suspicion, one that he could no longer outrun. And at the center of it all was the man who never seemed to leave Meghan's side, Markus Anderson. To understand how the affair rumors began, one must revisit the dynamic that had been quietly building behind the scenes. By the time the Netflix deal began to falter, Prince Harry had already become aware of an unsettling pattern. Markus was always there. When Meghan had an important pitch, Markus was in the room. When Meghan hosted small dinners at their Montecito estate, Markus was often seated beside her. When Meghan traveled to Los Angeles for media engagements or philanthropic appearances, Markus often showed up too, sometimes in photos, sometimes in the shadows. Initially, Harry chalked it up to friendship. He knew Markus had been in Meghan's life long before he entered the picture. He had heard all the stories, how Markus had supported her through her divorce from Trevor Engelson, how he had been her rock during difficult times on the set of Suits, how he had introduced her to powerful people in New York and London. But even the strongest friendships, Harry reasoned, should have boundaries. It was during a quiet weekend in early spring, one of the few the couple had to themselves, that the first real fracture appeared. According to insiders, Harry had returned home early from a solo trip to the UK, where he had attended a private charity event. Meghan hadn't expected him until the next morning. But when Harry walked into the house that evening, he was met with an unexpected scene. Markus Anderson, barefoot, sipping wine in the kitchen with Meghan. They weren't doing anything overtly suspicious, but the body language was undeniable. Too comfortable, too familiar, too intimate in a way that pierced Harry's instincts. There was no confrontation that night. Harry didn't explode or accuse. He observed, listened, watched, but something had shifted inside him, a sense of unease that refused to be silenced. That night, he reportedly slept in a different room. In the days that followed, Harry began to notice things he hadn't before, or perhaps things he had previously chosen to ignore. The frequent phone calls between Meghan and Markus that took place behind closed doors. The cryptic texts with emojis and half-sentences. The way Meghan seemed to perk up when Marcus's name appeared on her phone. He started asking gentle questions, but Meghan always responded with deflection or light laughter. "You're being paranoid," she'd say. "Marcus's family." But Harry couldn't shake it. The more he tried to convince himself it was nothing, the more his mind wandered to every story he'd ever heard about betrayal. Every tabloid scandal, every whisper from within palace walls warning him that love, fame, and power were a volatile mix. And the more he dwelled on those memories, the more the lines blurred between intuition and fear. One incident stands out as a pivotal turning point. Meghan was scheduled to attend a private fashion fundraiser in Los Angeles, a star-studded affair that Harry had no interest in joining. Meghan insisted it would be a quick in-and-out appearance, but she was gone for nearly 12 hours. When she returned, Harry noticed that her phone was unusually quiet, notifications silenced, screen face down. She claimed she had simply gone for dinner after the event with some girls, but when Harry casually asked who was there, her answer was vague. Just some friends. What she didn't know was that one of Harry's own acquaintances had also attended the event. And later that week, over drinks in a rare social outing without Meghan. This person offhandedly mentioned seeing her at the after-party with Markus. They seemed close, the acquaintance had said. Like, really close. Harry didn't respond. He just nodded, forced a smile, and changed the subject. But his thoughts were racing. Why would she lie about who she was with? Why hide it? Fueling Harry's suspicions even further were the rumors now leaking into the public domain. Social media accounts dedicated to royal gossip had begun speculating about Markus and Meghan's unusual bond. Reddit threads dissected photos of them together, pointing out small details, a hand on a shoulder, a lingering gaze, body proximity. TikTok creators went viral comparing timelines, showing that Markus often appeared at key events where Harry was notably absent. It wasn't long before journalists began sniffing around as well. An anonymous tip reportedly landed on the desk of a UK tabloid editor claiming that Meghan was emotionally entangled with a close friend and that Harry had become increasingly isolated in his own home. Though the story wasn't published at the time, the rumor had legs. Within media circles, speculation grew more intense. Inside their home, Harry was reaching a breaking point. According to sources close to the couple, arguments became more frequent and intense. Harry began withdrawing from public life even more, canceling engagements and spending long hours alone. Meghan, in contrast, seemed energized. She dove into her projects, hosted Zoom meetings, and continued networking with Hollywood contacts. And at the center of that growing ecosystem of influence remained Markus Anderson. One of the most heartbreaking elements of this chapter in Harry's life was the isolation. With his relationship with the royal family strained, and his close UK friends either alienated or distant, he had no one to turn to. Meghan had become his entire world, and now that world was cracking beneath his feet. His instincts told him something was wrong. His heart didn't want to believe it. It wasn't just the emotional distance, it was the secrets. The way Meghan avoided eye contact when he questioned her, the way she changed passwords on shared accounts, the sudden hesitance to share her calendar. These weren't the behaviors of someone hiding a surprise birthday party. These were the signs of someone hiding something much deeper. The moment that reportedly pushed Harry into a state of disbelief happened during a chance discovery. One afternoon, while borrowing Meghan's laptop to download a video file, Harry came across a series of emails between her and Markus. Most were benign, discussions about media strategy, branding, and philanthropic campaigns. But buried in the thread was one message that stood out. It was short, casual, but damning in its tone. Last night was risky, but worth it. That line, according to insiders, sent Harry into a silent spiral. He didn't confront Meghan immediately. He didn't storm out. He just closed the laptop, walked outside, and sat in the garden for hours. When Meghan eventually asked if everything was all right, he smiled and said he was just tired. In truth, something inside him had broken. For weeks, he reportedly kept the discovery to himself, trying to convince himself he'd misread the tone, that maybe it was about something else. Maybe risky meant a PR decision. Maybe worth it referred to a pitch. But the words echoed in his mind, louder with each passing day. It was around this time that Harry began seeking answers, not just through confrontation, but through investigation. He reportedly reached out to one of his old private security contacts in the UK, someone he trusted implicitly. He asked for discretion, for quiet help in finding out where Markus had been traveling. What he uncovered in the following weeks only deepened his dread. Records allegedly showed that Markus had traveled to Meghan's location on several occasions, often without any public-facing reason. Short trips, discreet hotels, private flights. The pattern was undeniable. The affair rumors were no longer just rumors. They were shaping into a narrative with dates, names, and traces. And for Prince Harry, a man who had turned his back on an entire institution in the name of love, the betrayal was now more than emotional. It was existential. What do you do when the person you trusted the most becomes the one you trust the least? For Harry, this question would haunt him through sleepless nights, awkward silences, and empty rooms. And soon, that question would lead to a moment that would change everything: the confrontation. There's a moment in every unraveling when denial gives way to painful clarity. For Prince Harry, that moment didn't come with shouting, slamming doors, or screaming matches. It arrived with quiet devastation, because the truth, when it finally made itself undeniable, did not shout. It whispered. By the time Harry reached the point of no return, he had spent weeks trapped in mental torment. Suspicion had become routine. Trust, once unshakable, had eroded into something brittle. But even then, even after reading that cryptic email from Markus Anderson to Meghan, even after hearing secondhand rumors, he held on a hope that there was another explanation, something, anything, that could redeem the woman he had defended against an entire empire. But what he found next shattered any illusion he had left. The breaking point began, ironically, as an attempt to find peace of mind. According to insiders familiar with the situation, Harry had grown increasingly anxious and isolated. He was no longer sleeping well. His appetite was erratic. His days blurred together in a haze of anxiety and silence. Meghan, meanwhile, appeared emotionally distant. She was frequently away, attending meetings, coordinating her foundation projects, or reportedly meeting with entertainment contacts, always just out of reach. One day, in a final attempt to silence the voice gnawing at the back of his mind, Harry decided to look deeper. He accessed a shared device they occasionally used for work, their home's smart assistant hub. What he didn't expect was that the device had synced location metadata from several connected phones and devices. When Harry opened the recent history log, he noticed something curious. Markus's phone had been within their private residence in Montecito during a time when Harry himself had been out of town, twice. The dates were not random. One aligned with Meghan's solo work weekend. The other matched a night Meghan claimed to be attending a women's charity dinner. Both times, Markus had been on the property for over 4 hours. The system logs didn't specify what occurred, but the overlapping presence was enough to cause Harry's heart to sink. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was data, a breadcrumb trail, a silent admission etched into digital memory. Still, some part of him needed more. Cold evidence, undeniable proof, something that couldn't be rationalized away. That's when Harry, in a moment of desperation, contacted a private digital forensics expert. The man was a trusted acquaintance from his army days, someone skilled in tech investigations and cybersecurity. Under the condition of total confidentiality, Harry asked him to analyze cloud backups, deleted messages, and device activity. What the expert reportedly uncovered was worse than Harry could have imagined. Deleted messages, hundreds of them, between Meghan and Markus, retrieved from cloud backups. Some were innocuous, others crossed boundaries. And a few were so intimate, so specific, that they left no room for misinterpretation. One message, sent late at night, read, "Wish you were still here. I hate when you leave. I can't sleep when you're not next to me." Another said, "It's getting harder to hide this. He's asking questions. We have to be more careful." Harry, upon reading these messages, reportedly broke down. Not just out of rage or heartbreak, but from the weight of everything he had sacrificed. He had left his country, his family, his military titles, and public support all to protect this woman, to build a life with her outside the harsh scrutiny of palace tradition. And now, in the sanctuary of their supposedly free and independent life, he was confronting the reality that he had been betrayed in the most intimate, devastating way. But the final piece of evidence came not from messages or metadata, but from an unexpected source, a staff member. This individual, a household staffer who had worked with the couple since their move to California, had always remained silent and professional. But after witnessing Harry's growing anguish and emotional collapse, they approached him privately. In hushed tones, they revealed what they had seen. One night, weeks earlier, while Harry was away in London, they had come across Markus and Meghan together in the backyard garden, away from the cameras. They were seated on a bench, hands intertwined, whispering to each other. At one point, the staffer claimed, they kissed. Not in a rushed, impulsive way, but slowly, deliberately, as if they had done it many times before. The staffer never reported it to anyone. Out of fear, out of loyalty, out of not wanting to be the person who destroyed a marriage. But in that moment, with Harry now fully confronting what he already knew deep down, the confession didn't even surprise him. It just confirmed what the messages, the digital trails, and the emotional distance had already spelled out. He had been living beside a lie. The confrontation came the next morning. There were no theatrics, no royal fury. Just a man confronting the woman he had trusted more than anyone. According to sources, Harry quietly handed Meghan a printed copy of the retrieved messages and said only one thing. "Tell me I'm wrong." Meghan reportedly stood frozen. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't immediately deny it. She just stared at the pages, then at Harry, and said nothing. What followed was hours of silence. Meghan eventually offered vague explanations, emotional support, misinterpreted friendship, being overwhelmed, but never a firm denial, never a clear apology. And that, for Harry, was enough. Later that day, Harry packed a small bag. No press statement, no announcement, just a quiet exit from the home that now felt more like a stranger's estate than a family residence. He was reportedly driven to a private airfield where he boarded a flight back to the UK. No royal entourage, no wife by his side. Just a broken man returning to the only place that ever truly felt like home, even if it meant walking back into a kingdom he once tried to leave behind forever. In the hours following his departure, Meghan was said to be in shock, not necessarily because of guilt, but because she hadn't expected Harry to walk away. Some insiders claim she believed he would confront her, they would argue, and then he'd forgive her as always. But this time, something had changed. Harry's silence spoke louder than any accusation ever could. He was done. The media caught wind days later. At first, it was a vague report. Harry returns to UK solo amid family tensions. But soon, rumors swirled. Sources close to the palace hinted at a major breakdown. Meghan's team issued no comment. Markus Anderson remained out of sight. But among those who knew the truth, the silence was deliberate. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the collapse of everything Harry had built outside the monarchy. The dream of a private life, a loving family, and a meaningful legacy all turned to ash. And the man he once tolerated in the background, Markus Anderson, had become the symbol of everything that went wrong. The breaking point wasn't one explosive moment. It was 1,000 small betrayals, buried beneath image management, PR spin, and carefully constructed narratives. And when the final truth surfaced, it didn't just fracture a marriage. It shattered the myth of the perfect royal escape. For Prince Harry, the act of packing his bags was more than a physical decision. It was a symbolic unraveling of everything he had held onto for the past few years. His love, his independence, his rebellion. Each shirt folded, each item removed from the closet, each personal belonging gathered from the California home he once believed was a sanctuary of freedom, now felt like a silent goodbye to a life he had sacrificed everything to build. The moment wasn't filled with rage or noise. It was quiet, methodical, heavy with a kind of sadness only betrayal can bring. Meghan wasn't there when he began gathering his things. She had left for a supposed wellness event in Santa Barbara that morning. The house was still. No cries from Archie. No soft humming of domestic life. Just the distant hum of a ceiling fan and Harry's own racing thoughts. As he zipped the final compartment of his travel bag, he paused and sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed where he and Meghan once whispered plans for their future. It all felt so distant now, like someone else's memories. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen for a long time before making the call. It wasn't an easy number to dial. Their relationship had been fractured for years. Words had been said, public interviews given, trust shattered. But at that moment, there was no one else Harry could turn to. Not as a duke, not as a media personality, but as a son. He called his father. On the other end, King Charles III answered after a few rings. There was a long silence at first, an unspoken tension hanging between them, built over years of misunderstandings, grievances, and missed opportunities. Harry hadn't called his father in months. They had communicated indirectly, through aides or short, impersonal texts. But this time, Harry spoke first. "I'm coming home." King Charles didn't reply immediately. But when he did, his voice wasn't cold, it was cautious, guarded. "What happened?" Harry hesitated, choosing his words with care. "I can't do this anymore," he said. "Not here. Not with her. It's over." Charles exhaled sharply, perhaps a mixture of surprise and confirmation. Rumors had reached the palace, of course. Whispers from courtiers, muted warnings from old friends who had heard things from Hollywood, even a few anonymous emails that had reached the security teams. But none of it had ever been confirmed. Until now. Harry continued, explaining the messages, the surveillance logs, the confrontation, and the absence of denial. He didn't cry. He didn't rant. He simply laid it out, with the kind of grim resolve that only comes when there is no more room left for denial. Charles, ever the pragmatist, did not gloat. He didn't say, "I told you so." He simply asked one question. "What do you need?" Harry paused again, his voice soft. "I need a place to stay. Somewhere quiet. Away from the press. Somewhere Archie can visit when it's safe. Somewhere I can just breathe." Charles nodded on the other end. "You'll stay at Sandringham. The estate is quiet this time of year. I'll notify the staff, and I'll handle the press." That final sentence hit Harry unexpectedly. "You'll handle the press." For years, he had accused the palace of feeding the press, manipulating narratives, and failing to protect him and Meghan. And now, after everything, here was his father, extending a hand. Not as king, but as a father who perhaps never stopped caring, no matter how complicated the past had been. The call ended not with a formal goodbye, but with a simple exchange. "Thank you," Harry said. "I'll see you soon," replied Charles. And with that, Harry felt the faintest flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: stability. He called for a private transport through his security team and ensured it was arranged discreetly. No flashing cameras. No motorcade. Just a blacked-out SUV to take him to the Santa Barbara airport, where a private jet awaited. Chartered by a friend from the UK, someone who had remained quietly loyal even after the royal fallout. As Harry left the Montecito estate, he glanced one last time at the house, the grand gates, the trimmed hedges, the quiet hills beyond. Everything about it had once represented freedom, love, and escape. Now it felt like a gilded cage, one he was finally walking away from. The flight was silent. No entourage, no staff. Just Harry, staring out the window, his thoughts a blur of heartbreak, anger, and exhaustion. He didn't know what awaited him in the UK. He didn't know what the public would say, or how the press would spin it. But he didn't care anymore. He had nothing left to lose. When the plane touched down in the UK, royal security was already waiting at a private hangar, briefed in full by palace aides. There was no media presence, no fanfare, just a few cold gusts of wind and the weight of returning to a country that had once celebrated him, then scorned him, and now watched in confusion from a distance. He was driven directly to Sandringham. Not to London, not to Windsor. Sandringham, the country estate where the royal family traditionally spent Christmas, but which now served as a quiet retreat. It was perfect, isolated, peaceful, removed from the noise. As the car wound its way up the long gravel path, past frost-tipped hedgerows and ancient trees, Harry stared at the familiar landscape. So much had changed since he'd last been here. The last time he walked these halls, he was still a royal in good standing. Still a husband who believed his love story was bulletproof. Inside, a fire had been lit. A modest meal had been prepared. Nothing extravagant. Just warm food, warm light, and the familiar smell of home. He was greeted not by staff, but by an old friend of the family, someone who had worked at the estate for decades and who simply placed a hand on Harry's shoulder and said, "Welcome back, sir." Later that night, after unpacking and changing into something comfortable, Harry sat in the drawing room and picked up the phone again. This time, he called William. Their relationship had been under immense strain for years. Ever since the fallout over Meghan, the brothers had barely spoken. There had been moments of attempted reconciliation, brief glimpses of the bond they once shared as boys, but they were always short-lived, stifled by unspoken pain and public pressure. But this time, Harry was calling not as a rival, but as a brother in need. William answered. There was no small talk. Just a long pause before Harry said the words he had never imagined himself saying. "You were right." William didn't respond immediately, but when he did, there was no triumph in his voice. Only sympathy. "Come to Norfolk tomorrow," William said. "We'll talk. Just you and me." For the first time in a long time, Harry felt a sense of relief. Not because the pain had subsided, but because, finally, he wasn't carrying it alone. Back in California, Meghan returned to an empty house. The staff were still there, the lights still on. But Harry was gone. No notes. No messages. Just the hollow silence that follows when someone decides they've had enough. She made a few calls, sent a few texts. No reply. By the next morning, tabloids had caught wind of Harry's return to the UK. The headlines were cautious. Prince Harry returns amid personal turmoil. But the speculation was immediate. Meghan's team went into damage control mode. Markus Anderson was nowhere to be seen. Publicists were briefed, narratives crafted, statements drafted, but nothing was released. Not yet. Because in a story this big, every word would matter. Every silence, every photo, every choice. And the world was watching. When Meghan Markle returned to the Montecito estate that quiet evening, she expected the usual, perhaps Harry out for a walk, the staff going about their duties, the gentle hum of the house filled with the warmth of routine. What she didn't expect was silence. Not the comfortable kind, but the unnerving, hollow silence that settles after something has gone terribly wrong. She walked into the living room and immediately sensed it. Something had changed. His shoes were no longer at the door. The duffel bag he usually tossed near the coat stand was missing. The atmosphere in the house had shifted, as though it was holding its breath. Meghan looked around and noticed the subtle signs. A drawer left slightly ajar, the edge of a closet door not fully closed, the faint impression on the hallway table where Harry used to rest his sunglasses. All of it felt like absence wrapped in finality. She called out once. Then again. No answer. At first, she assumed he had simply gone out. Maybe to meet someone, maybe to clear his head. She wasn't entirely unaware of the recent tension. Harry had been quiet, observant, distant, but he hadn't said a word about leaving. Not directly. Not with the kind of finality she now felt in every inch of the house. Then she noticed the envelope. Placed on the kitchen counter, it wasn't dramatic. No scribbled note or tear-stained farewell. Just a manila folder. Inside were printed copies of the retrieved messages, travel logs, and a single page. A list of dates and times, some underlined, some circled. And at the bottom, Harry had written just 2 words. You knew. She didn't cry. At least, not immediately. She sat at the counter, staring at the papers, her face unreadable. After a long pause, she poured herself a glass of water, took a sip, and began reading through the documents in full. Each message brought a shift in her posture. Tightening shoulders, clenched jaw, a fleeting frown. Still, no tears. According to sources close to her inner circle, Meghan didn't respond to Harry immediately. No texts, no calls, no desperate apologies. She remained in the house, retreating into isolation for a full day before emerging to contact her team. Not to confess, not to admit anything, but to prepare for what she anticipated was coming, media frenzy. The following morning, her PR team arrived in Montecito. Lawyers, brand advisors, crisis managers, everyone summoned in hushed urgency. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because they didn't know what Harry would do next. He hadn't gone public. There was no official statement. No leak from the palace. Just silence. And that silence was dangerous. Meghan reportedly instructed her team to prepare a non-response strategy. No admissions. No denials. Just distance. Her message was clear. He left, but I don't owe the world an explanation. And yet, behind closed doors, she was seething. Not because of guilt, but because of loss of control. To her inner circle, she maintained innocence. She told close friends, it's all being twisted. There was no affair. Markus has always been my friend. People are projecting what they want to see. She claimed the messages were emotional, yes, but not romantic. She argued that Harry was spiraling, creating stories from shadows. She maintained, over and over again, that nothing had happened. But even her inner circle had begun to splinter. Some quietly began questioning her narrative. Longtime friends grew silent in group chats. Collaborators from the Archwell Foundation asked to postpone meetings. A few PR allies suggested she take a break from public life. The once loyal ecosystem around her began to wobble under the weight of rumor, scrutiny, and the slow collapse of trust. Meanwhile, the media caught wind of Harry's departure. While no official statement had been made, photographers spotted his arrival at Sandringham. Palace insiders, though tight-lipped, confirmed he was staying with the royal family for personal matters. Meghan's name was not mentioned, but the headlines began writing themselves. Prince Harry returns to the UK alone amid crisis. Is the Sussex marriage crumbling? Markus Anderson's role under scrutiny as Harry vanishes. Meghan, according to insiders, was furious. Not at the media, but at the lack of control. For years, she had shaped the narrative. She had transformed from actress to duchess to global figure with precise media management. Now, The narrative was slipping from her grasp. She reached out to Markus. According to sources, their phone call was brief and tense. Markus, who had gone into hiding the moment the story began to leak, was allegedly panicked. He had not expected Harry to uncover the messages. He certainly hadn't expected them to be printed, analyzed, and handed to Meghan in a folder. Now, he was the face of the betrayal. And even in his silence, the world was beginning to identify him as the man who may have ruined the Sussex fairy tale. Meghan reportedly assured him, "This will pass. It always does." But even she didn't seem to believe that. Friends say Meghan spent hours reviewing old footage, statements, and PR releases, trying to determine how she could reposition the narrative. Her lawyers advised silence. Her publicist suggested a soft reset through philanthropic visibility. But no one dared suggest a full denial. Not yet. The evidence was too fresh, too raw, and too easily corroborated. Still, publicly, Meghan said nothing. No Instagram posts. No interviews. No leaks to friendly media outlets. Her silence was deliberate. Calculated. She wanted the story to lose oxygen. She believed, as she had before, that public opinion could be managed, that the headlines would eventually shift, that Harry might even return. But she underestimated something crucial. This time, Harry wasn't confused. He wasn't unsure. He had found what he needed. And for once, he hadn't confided in Meghan. He had confided in his father, in his brother, and perhaps even more damagingly, in the institution he once rejected. In the weeks that followed, the world washed with a mixture of fascination and pity. Meghan was photographed walking alone in Montecito, often dressed in oversized coats and sunglasses. The once ever-present smiles and perfectly curated photo ops vanished. She canceled public engagements. Interviews were rescheduled, and Archwell's social media accounts went eerily quiet. Behind the scenes, Meghan began telling friends that she had been misunderstood, that her relationship with Markus had been weaponized by the press, that Harry had overreacted. She floated suggestions that his mental health had declined, that he was being influenced by palace figures eager to tear them apart. She crafted the beginnings of a defense, but it wasn't gaining traction. Even some of her most loyal allies in the media began keeping their distance. Eventually, she made one calculated move, an anonymous leak. A quote appeared in a US-based gossip column suggesting that Harry had been emotionally unstable and that Meghan had always been faithful. The piece also described Markus as a trusted advisor whose relationship with Meghan was entirely platonic. The article didn't cite a source, but insiders knew where it came from. It didn't help. The comments were brutal. Public sentiment, once divided, began to lean heavily in Harry's favor. People recalled his sacrifices, his vulnerability, his love for Meghan and his children. The idea that he had walked away only after undeniable betrayal rang true for many. And Meghan? She was left behind, not just physically, but culturally, emotionally, strategically. She had once controlled the narrative so effectively that even the firmest critics had to play catch-up. But this time, the silence was louder than her PR spin. She still denied everything, even when friends asked directly, even when former staffers quietly cut ties, even when Markus allegedly stopped replying to her messages. She denied it because, perhaps, she believed the denial. Or maybe, more disturbingly, she thought she could still win. But the damage was done. In the wake of Prince Harry's quiet return to the UK and Meghan Markle's steely silence in Montecito, a new storm began to brew, not from palace insiders or leaked documents, but from voices that had long remained quiet. Some had once defended Meghan with vigor, others had kept their distance out of fear or loyalty. But now, with the unraveling of one of the most highly scrutinized relationships of the modern era playing out in slow motion, the walls around her began to crack. Friends, former allies, and even long-standing critics stepped forward, not necessarily to slander her name, but to finally tell their version of the story. And when they did, the collective narrative surrounding Meghan Markle shifted again. It started subtly. A stylist who had worked with Meghan during her time on Suits spoke anonymously to a Canadian lifestyle magazine. The interview was meant to be a retrospective on fashion in the show's heyday, but the journalist slipped in a question about Meghan's transition into the royal family. The stylist's answer was polite, yet loaded. She always knew how to play to the room. She didn't just walk into a space. She assessed it, owned it, and controlled it. That's not criticism, just observation. But I'll say this, she was never lost, never naive. She had plans. That quote ricocheted across social media. Screenshotted, analyzed, picked apart. It didn't confirm any allegations, but it laid a foundation. The idea that Meghan was always straight. A former palace aide, protected by anonymity under an NDA, but reportedly furious after what they described as years of misinformation, spoke to a UK newspaper in vague but pointed terms. There were always concerns about her relationship with certain individuals from her past. Markus, in particular, was seen as over-involved. He wasn't staff. He wasn't security. But he had access. He had influence. And in some cases, he made decisions that should have come from Harry. The article didn't make the front page, but it didn't need to. The quote made its way onto royal gossip sites, YouTube commentary channels, and celebrity podcasts. The story was now alive in the court of public opinion. And it wasn't just staffers. An old friend from Meghan's pre-royal circle, once part of her tightly controlled inner group, told a blogger that their relationship with her ended suddenly and without explanation just before the royal engagement. I was supportive. I was loyal. And then one day, I was cut out. No warning. No fight. Nothing. Just silence. It was like I'd been edited out of her life. The blogger, known for celebrity deep dives, took that interview and combined it with prior stories of Markle ghosting friends, staff, and even family. A video titled The Meghan Markle Friendship Purge, Where Did Everyone Go?, quickly amassed millions of views. It didn't rely on gossip, it laid out a timeline. And in doing so, it revealed something more damaging than scandal, a pattern. Viewers began commenting in droves. She isolates people when they no longer serve a purpose. Why was Markus the only one who stayed? Was Harry ever really her partner? Or just a means to an end? And then, as if on cue, the critics came. Lady Colin Campbell, never one to shy away from controversy, dedicated an entire segment of her YouTube channel to the Markus Anderson situation. She spoke with her usual theatrical flair, but this time, her tone was deadly serious. What we have here, she said, is a story that has been hiding in plain sight. The woman who cried victim for years may now find herself exposed not by tabloids or palace officials, but by the very people she once called friends. Her video skyrocketed to trending status. Soon after, Samantha Markle, the estranged half-sister with a long history of public disputes against Meghan, seized the moment. She gave a fiery interview to a conservative U.S. network, stating, "Harry left his family, his honor, and his nation for her. And what did he get? Betrayal. I've said it for years, she's a manipulator, not a martyr." The comments were brutal, but the viewership was massive. Meghan's defenders, once vocal on social platforms, were now notably quieter. The ones who remained argued that these stories were just the vultures circling during a vulnerable moment. But even those sympathetic to Meghan were beginning to ask questions. Then came the most surprising voice of all. A Hollywood producer who had been loosely attached to a scrapped Archwell documentary project. In a rare public statement, he wrote on Twitter, "I was excited to work with them. But when we started discussing creative direction, it became clear Meghan wasn't interested in telling a story. She wanted to control the story. Every frame, every quote, every narrative." His words were interpreted as more than professional critique. They were seen as a subtle nod to a greater issue, manipulation. And as all these stories bubbled to the surface, even Markus Anderson could no longer hide. Photos emerged of him arriving at a private hotel in New York, sunglasses shielding his eyes, a scarf pulled high across his face. Paparazzi asked questions. He said nothing, but the silence only fed the narrative. Was he hiding? Running? Being silenced? Those who once worked closely with him at Soho House began leaking details. One insider told a podcast host, Markus was powerful, but always in the shadows. That's how he liked it. He connected people, managed reputations, moved pieces on the board. And when Meghan joined the royal family, he didn't step back. He stepped closer. Meanwhile, back in the UK, Harry remained secluded. But reports from palace insiders painted a different picture than the broken, bitter man Meghan's team had subtly tried to imply. Harry had reconnected with William. The brothers had reportedly met twice in private, away from staff, away from courtiers. No formal reconciliation, just time. reflection, bonding. They were also said to have spoken with King Charles multiple times as a trio, something that hadn't happened in over 3 years. The tide was turning. Royal supporters who had once blamed Meghan for the couple's withdrawal from duty were now finding vindication. And the palace, careful not to engage directly, allowed the narrative to unfold naturally, fully aware that silence, in this case, spoke volumes. Even those outside the royal sphere were weighing in. Media personalities, influencers, and even late-night hosts began referring to the story. Some mocked the drama. Others approached it more seriously. But one common theme began to emerge: the question of whether Harry had been misled from the start. That question lingered in the public consciousness. And for Meghan, it posed a new threat, not from enemies, but from the erosion of belief. For years, she had crafted a narrative of victimhood and triumph, of overcoming prejudice and rejection. But now, people were beginning to question whether they had been sold a version of events that didn't hold up under pressure. And once that belief cracks, especially in the public arena, it is near impossible to fully repair.